My daughter left me in a nursing home like I didn't matter anymore. But she forgot one detail, small yet powerful. And that changed everything. The car door slammed shut without a word. Emily didn't even wait for the nurse to finish writing down my name. She just drove off, like she was dropping off an Amazon return, not her mother. The afternoon sun filtered through the large, front windows of Maplewood Senior Living, but inside, everything felt dim, muted, lifeless, the wheelchair they placed. Kneeing creaked with every push, as if it too questioned why I was here. I was rolled down a long hallway lined with faded wallpaper and residents slumped in chairs, their eyes vacant or wandering. There was no warmth, no scent of home. Just that sterile, lemony smell of resignation. My hands trembled slightly in my lap. From the cold or the betrayal, I wasn't sure. Emily hadn't looked back. Not once. Not when she handed over my insurance card. Not when they took my suitcase. And certainly not when I reached into my coat pocket and felt the familiar edges of the one thing she hadn't counted on. The thing she didn't even know I still had. It was small, tucked inside a velvet pouch. But it carried weight, memory, leverage. She thought I had nothing left. No cards to play, no story worth hearing. But this detail, this one forgotten piece of the past, was about to upend everything. First night was the hardest, not because of the unfamiliar bed or the cold sheets, but because of the silence. Real silence, the kind that hums in your ears when everything you counted on is gone. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, the light from the hallway casting long shadows through the glass panel above the door. Every sound, a footstep, a cough, the distant hum of the vending machine felt louder here. Emptier, dinner had been served at 5 p.m. sharp. Meatloaf, mashed potatoes, peas. The kind of meal that makes you feel more like a number than a person. I'd sat alone, pretending to enjoy the gelatinous gravy while around me, other residents stared into space or chatted about grandchildren they hadn't seen in years. I wondered what story they'd been told when they were dropped off. It's for your own good, maybe. You'll be safer here. But the truth? We were all just inconvenient. I thought about Emily, her crisp tone, her rushed movements, the way she avoided eye contact that morning. There had been no warning, no family meeting, no discussion. Just a firm, final decision. "It's better this way, Mom," she'd said, as if she were talking about rearranging furniture. And maybe in her mind she was, but I knew her. I'd raised her. There was something she wasn't saying. Something behind the urgency. Behind the coldness dot as I reached once more into the small inside pocket of my sweater, my fingers closed around the velvet pouch. That tiny item inside, still hidden, still waiting, was more than just a keepsake. It was a key dot in keys. Even the smallest ones can open doors that were never meant to be shut dot by day 3. I began to notice things. Not just the routines, medication rounds, bingo at 2, lights out by 8, but the people behind them. You'd be surprised how much you can learn just by watching. Or maybe you wouldn't. If you've ever had to survive on silence, Dot Helen was the first to speak to me. She had one of those sharp New England voices, like she'd spent her life correcting students and never quite stopped. Turns out she had. Former English teacher, 2 sons, one of whom hadn't called in over 6 months. "He's not heartless," she said over breakfast. "Just married to a woman who hates me." Then she laughed like that was some kind of punchline. There was Tom, too, a retired electrician who kept rewiring his lamp just to pass the time. And Gladys, who wore full makeup every morning and claimed she once danced with Sinatra. Maybe she had. This place blurred the line between memory and imagination. Who were we to challenge it? In a way, their stories were like mine. Different versions of the same theme. Forgotten, shelved, inconvenient. But there was a quiet strength in how they held themselves. A stubborn refusal to completely fade. And that gave me something I didn't realize I was looking for. I began sitting near the windows more often, where the light hit just right. I watched squirrels outside dig and bury their treasures, tiny, frantic creatures clinging to the idea of seasons. I understood that Dot one afternoon. As I rolled myself back to my room, Helen called out, "You're not like the others. You've got something tucked away in you, I can tell." I froze. For a second, I wondered if she somehow knew about the pouch, about the past. But she just smiled and went back to her crossword. Still, the words clung to me, Dot, because she was right, Dot. It had been tucked away in the bottom drawer of the small dresser they assigned me, wedged between folded cardigans and a bundle of old church bulletins I'd never thrown out. The keepsake box. Smooth, dark wood, with tiny carved roses along the edges. It looked like something you'd find in a grandmother's attic, which, I suppose, was fitting. I had taken it with me that morning, not because I thought I'd need it, but because I couldn't bear to leave it behind. Emily hadn't noticed when I slipped it into the suitcase. She never asked about it. Never asked about anything, really. Inside were old letters, brittle with age, tied with a pale blue ribbon. Photographs, some black and white, some faded color, curled at the corners. One of them showed a younger version of me in a summer dress, laughing with a man whose arms circled my waist like we were made of the same breath. He wasn't my husband, and he sure as hell wasn't Emily's father. His name was Thomas Whitaker, a name no one in my life had spoken in nearly 4 decades. I had met him long before I settled into the role of wife and mother. Before I said yes to stability and no to risk. Thomas had been something else, older, brilliant, ambitious, and already married. But the heart doesn't care about such details when it's young and reckless. Ours was a secret affair. One of those whirlwind things that burn too hot to last. But what Emily never knew, what no one ever knew, was that he had left something behind. Something far more lasting than the affair itself. That night, I reread the last letter he ever sent me. It was dated October 1985, 3 weeks before his sudden death in a boating accident. In it, he wrote, "If anything ever happens to me, look for the key. It's yours. And it matters more than you think." Until now, I never understood what he meant, but now, maybe I was beginning to. I stared at the photo for what felt like an hour. It was the kind of image that could pass for harmless if you didn't know the context. 2 people at a picnic, mid-laugh, a half-empty bottle of wine between them. But there was something in the way his hand rested on my knee, the way my body leaned instinctively toward his. Something that said, this was more than friendship. I flipped it over. My handwriting, still neat back then, read, Cape Cod, 84. It all came rushing back, the rented cottage, the late-night jazz records, the way Thomas looked at me like I was a life he might have chosen if things were simpler. He had told me once, quietly, almost apologetically, "You deserve a life that doesn't hide in the corners." I didn't understand it then. I thought he meant I should be with someone who could love me openly. But now I wondered if he'd been trying to tell me something else. Why had he mentioned a key? Why did he say it mattered? And what exactly had he left behind? The doubt crept in fast. What if it was nothing? What if, in my grief, I'd built an entire mythology around a few romantic letters and a man who'd belonged to someone else? But then I remembered Emily's words the day she left me here. She'd said, "You're too proud to admit what you cost this family." At the time, I'd assumed she meant my stubbornness, my refusal to sell the house, maybe even the tension after her divorce. But what if she'd meant something else? What if she knew or suspected a truth I never intended to reveal? And if she did, what was she afraid I'd find? I wasn't supposed to have a phone. Not really. They let us use the front desk landline for emergencies or short calls to family, neither of which applied to me. But Jonah, one of the evening aides, had a soft spot for quiet women with questions in their eyes. One night, after helping me with my blanket, he leaned in and said, "If you ever need to make a private call, use the phone in the laundry closet. No cameras there." I waited 2 days before working up the nerve. When I finally slipped into the tiny, bleach-scented room and dialed the number, My hand shook so badly I had to press the keypad twice. The man who answered had a slow, careful voice, the kind of voice used to being recorded. His name was Martin Locke, an estate attorney in Boston. I remembered it from the final letter Thomas had sent, a name I'd underlined but never dared to follow up on. I introduced myself, unsure if he'd remember anything after so long. But he did. I had been waiting decades for someone to call me about Mr. Whitaker. He said, "And you're the only person who ever could." He told me Thomas had arranged a confidential trust shortly before his death. Something off the books, personal, not corporate. It wasn't money exactly, or not just money. It was something tied to intellectual property. Rights to something he'd invented but never made public. He left it in your name, Locke said, but there were obstacles. Obstacles, like a grieving widow with powerful attorneys, like a daughter who hated secrets, and a life I built on silence instead of truth. As the line crackled in my hand, I realized Emily didn't just abandon me out of resentment. She was trying to bury something, but now it was coming back. She showed up on a Thursday. No call, no warning. Just her voice at the front desk, clipped and impatient. "I'm here to see Clara Whitaker." I hadn't seen Emily in over 3 weeks. When she entered my room, her eyes scanned everything. Not for sentiment, for evidence. Her jaw was tight, arms crossed like a lawyer prepping for cross-examination. She didn't sit. "I got a call," she said flatly. From someone named Locke. I didn't answer, not right away. I wanted to see how far she'd go without me filling in the blanks. He said there was a document. A trust. Something with your name on it. She paused. Something Dad never knew about. There it was, the crack in her voice. The part of her still trying to piece together a version of the past that made sense. "You lied to us," she said. "All those years, you lied." I took a slow breath. "I protected what I had to, and you never asked." Her face twisted. "You had an affair. I didn't deny it." She stepped closer. "So, what is it? A bank account? Some old patent? What could possibly be worth hiding after all this time?" And then I saw it, the flicker of fear behind the anger. She wasn't just furious that I kept something. She was terrified of what it might mean, of what it might take from her. "I don't know yet," I said, which was true. "But I'm going to find out." Emily stood there, caught between pride and panic. And for the first time in years, I saw a woman I didn't entirely recognize. She left without touching me, without hugging me. But before the door closed, she said something strange. "If you open this box, you won't just ruin the past, you'll ruin everything that's left." I didn't know what she meant, but I was getting closer to finding out. That night, sleep didn't come easily. I kept replaying her words, "You'll ruin everything that's left," as if what we had was still intact. As if she hadn't already walked away. The next morning, Jonah brought me an envelope. FedExed, marked urgent, looks official. Inside, a single-page letter from Martin Locke, along with a notarized photocopy of Thomas Whitaker's final addendum. It was dated 3 days before his death. The document stated, in plain legal terms, that the intellectual property in question, an early prototype for a data encryption algorithm that would later become foundational in secure online banking, had been co-developed with someone else. Me. I stared at the line with my name on it, almost numb. Thomas had included me not just out of love or guilt, but because I'd contributed. I remembered the long evenings we spent discussing ideas, me scribbling notes, poking holes in his theories, suggesting alternate models. At the time, I thought I was just being supportive, but he'd taken me seriously. More than my own husband ever did. More than I did, maybe, but here's the twist. The patent had been filed under a shell corporation, later acquired by a major tech firm, quietly, privately, and part of the licensing rights had been frozen in legal limbo. Until now. Emily knew. Somehow, she knew. Or maybe she'd found hints, old letters, conversations overheard, things I dismissed too quickly. Maybe she'd pieced together just enough to feel threatened. Because if the story got out, that her mother had been cut out of a fortune, that her father might have known and stayed quiet. It wouldn't just shift the money Dot, it would shatter the legacy she believed she was protecting Dot in the nursing home. I was powerless. But in this hidden, sleeping piece of the past, I had leverage. The meeting with the lawyer happened via Zoom. Modern justice through a 10-inch screen. In a rec room that smelled like floor polish and old soup. Martin Locke looked older than I expected, with silver hair and a tweed blazer like something out of a different century. But his voice was sharp, assured. He explained everything in crisp, measured terms. The trust Thomas created had quietly matured. The encryption patent he developed, the one we brainstormed over kitchen counters and coffee-stained notebooks, had become the foundation of a multi-billion-dollar tech portfolio. My name had never been on the public record, but the signed documents and dated correspondences were airtight. And now, with me alive and no legal dispute from Thomas's estate, the firm had no choice but to acknowledge my intellectual share. What does that mean? I asked him. It means, Clara, he said with a faint smile, you're owed, not just financially, historically. The number he cited made my heart thud. Enough to buy 10 houses, send every grandchild to college, and still have more. Left over than I could ever spend. But the money wasn't what shook me. It was the fact that I hadn't been forgotten. That somewhere tucked between betrayal and silence, my voice had mattered. Even if only one man had truly heard it. Emily tried calling that evening. I let it go to voicemail. Then another, and another. Her tone shifted from angry to desperate to careful. I didn't know the whole story, she said in one message. Can we talk? Please. But I wasn't ready. Not yet. Because for the first time in years, the story was mine again. The sky outside was the color of wet concrete when Emily arrived again, this time without calling ahead. She looked smaller somehow, thinner, like someone who hadn't slept in days. Her designer coat hung loose on her frame, and there was no trace of makeup. Just rawness. Maybe regret. I don't want anything from you, she said the moment we sat down. I just need to understand. I studied her. The girl I'd once tucked into bed after nightmares now stood across from me, uncertain, vulnerable. But not innocent. I never wanted your money, she added quickly. It wasn't about that. It was about what you didn't tell me. About who you were. There it was, the real wound. I had hidden the strongest parts of myself for so long. Even my own daughter had believed. I was fragile, replaceable, a footnote in someone else's story. And now that she saw what I'd done, what I'd built, in secret, she didn't know where she fit anymore. You were ashamed of me, I said quietly. Not just of what I did, but of who I used to be. Emily looked like she might deny it, but then she nodded. I didn't understand you, she said, and I think I punished you for it. We sat in silence. There was no tidy ending to this conversation. No simple, I'm sorry, that would fix decades of distance. But I reached into the small box on my lap, pulled out a photo, one of Thomas and me standing in front of the chalkboard where we used to sketch out our ideas. I want you to have this, I said. So, I was more than what I let you see. She took it with both hands, carefully. Later that night, after she left, I looked at the settlement papers once more. I could rewrite my will, leave it all to charity, or to the nursing staff who treated me with more kindness than my own blood. But I didn't decide right then. Because sometimes justice isn't a final act. It's a quiet knowing that you were never as small as they made you feel. If you've made it this far, it means this story touched you in some way. So don't leave without subscribing. It really helps the channel and keeps me motivated to share more stories like this. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? And which part of this story moved you the most?